Hey everyone, welcome back to Humanology on Air. I am Jeeves, and today I am joined by the lovely Terri Cameron. Thank you for coming on, Terri.
Thank you so much. I'm Terri Cameron. I'm Director of Media Strategy here at Kelley. And when I heard about this topic of conversation, I kind of strong-armed my way in here a little bit to join Jen, because I think the conversation that we're having today about connected TV is really exciting. And I've had the fortune of being in this industry a long time, so I've seen it from buying TV when it's, linear cable. That's what we did back then, all through the evolution of digital and bringing it up to speed. And now we're buying it through a connected device, as well as still linear in some ways. So I think the conversation that we had today with Paul was really informative, and we learned a lot of great things.
Yeah, I will say, I think this has been one of my favorite interviews to date. So I will tell you, Paul Foots is from Google. He is the connected TV specialist, and his whole job is to kind of bring advertisers on board, get us into the know of what's going on with connected TV. And I think he does a really great job of doing that. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey everyone, and hello to you guys. I'm so glad that you're both here today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Love it. And you know what's fun is we haven't ever talked about connected TV. We've done like YouTube from a creative best practices, like the ABCDs, but we have never actually gone sort of that higher level media perspective on connected TV. So Paul, I'm just gonna start with you as our special guest. Can you just bring us into the definition of connected TV? Like, I know that we're gonna be hearing a lot from you about kind of Google's point of view about things, but just even beyond Google, quick definition for
for sure. It's good because I usually start off any presentation around connected TV just to kind of level set what we're talking about, because there's so many different acronyms floating around there. So usually when we're talking about CTV or connected TV, we're talking about the device. I like to ground conversations in the device. So connected TV, meaning the TV screen versus a mobile phone or a laptop. And so that's kind of like the first lens is the device. And the second lens is the content. And this is where we start to get a lot of different acronyms like OTT, AVOD, SVOD, FAST, MVPD. Those are all just different types of content. So I guess the most famous SVOD would be like Netflix, right? So subscription video on demand.
Okay.
And then you've got AVOD, which is advertising supported video on demand. So YouTube would fall under that category.
That's my favorite.
But then again, we have Netflix now that is entering the ad space. So they're technically also becoming an AVOD. But long story short, there are lots of different flavors of OTT content. And that is what I would say is the content, because that could appear on not only TV screens, but also because you can watch Netflix on your phone,
right.
You can watch YouTube on your laptop, etc. So that's kind of like the content lens.
Okay.
And then
you didn't actually say what OTT is. You
said OTT,
AVOD.
Did I skip that? Acronym city.
You said over the top?
Is it over the top?
Over the top, yeah. So it's kind of a legacy term, over the top, meaning it's to differentiate itself from OTA, which is over the air. So in the context of 2024, it maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is one of those acronyms that's been around for a while. Right. So OTT is kind of just a way to describe something that is not your traditional over-the-air appointment-based linear broadcast.
Like
content.
cable and stuff, yeah.
Cable, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So OTT has become sort of this legacy umbrella term describing all non-linear content.
I feel like now versus say 10 years ago, I think I exclusively watch connected TV at this point, but it's fun that we're having Google at a conversation about TV, considering that's not where Google started.
Right,
and I bet Google's like, yeah, we didn't, well, I don't know what Google knew, but whether y'all could have predicted that you'd be in this, in the TV game.
Hard to say. I mean, if you look at the history, maybe there was someone prescient and a lot smarter than I am that foresaw all this. But I still remember back in 2006 when Google bought YouTube. I had just started working at Google, and a few months later, there were rumors floating around that Google was going to buy YouTube. And most of my colleagues were saying, nah, they would never do that. It's ridiculous. But sure enough, Google ended up buying YouTube in November 2006. And if you think about even the name YouTube, the tube part is sort of a nod to the tube.
Yeah.
It's a nod to TV, and it was meant sort of as this personalized digital alternative or internet-enabled version of TV. And I'm not sure if they ever intended it for it to be actually on TV screens. And that kind of happened many, many years later, just as sort of an evolution thanks to the technology, right? Mm-hmm. So with more high-speed internet and broadband and higher tech TV screens, the internet arrived on TV screens. And as such, this streaming behavior became more and more common. And so people started to watch things like YouTube on their TV screen. And I remember seeing reports, a couple of years before the pandemic, where we would run reports on YouTube, and we would see, we would differentiate between mobile, desktop, and tablet. And those would be the three primary device segments. And advertisers are interested to know where they were appearing. They would have maybe different strategies for mobile versus desktop. And then we started to see a little line item at the bottom of these reports called connected TV. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. People are watching YouTube on their TV screens now. But it was so small, it was like, we didn't pay that much attention to it. And then all of a sudden during the pandemic, it blew up. And now it's our fastest growing screen. It's been our fastest growing screen on YouTube for the last 5 years. And it has surpassed tablet, it has surpassed desktop. So it is right up there with mobile in terms of usage. And I think now the most recent stat is 17 million Canadians are watching YouTube on their TV screens. So it's become, not overnight, because it was a bit of a slow burn, but the pandemic certainly accelerated things. But now it's sort of the primary source of growth for YouTube, and it's one of the preeminent ways people consume not only YouTube but other platforms as well.
My daughter's responsible for 50% of that growth.
My daughters as well. Yeah.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I think many, many years ago, we had a challenge with convincing or telling clients about the audiences on connected TV. The audiences weren't there yet. The audiences weren't huge, but especially amplified by the pandemic, we now see so much audience in connected TV and a plethora of services and availability and ad-supported services. So what do you think is going to happen with regards to like fragmentation and reach? Like, there's so much choice that's out there. For a while, it was like there was a few really big ones, so you could really kind of put your eggs in that basket and get some pretty good reach, but now it's becoming more and more fragmented. So what's a good strategy? How should people approach that from an advertising perspective?
Yeah, great question. I don't have the easy answer to that, but fragmentation certainly is one of the growing trends in connected TV. But I think fragmentation has always been a theme with advertising in general. Think back to the early days of the internet. We saw the same thing. You could make a plan with 3 or 4 websites and you'd be covered. And then fast forward a few years, all of a sudden it's 20,000 websites or 100,000 websites or 1 million, whatever. And then programmatic sort of came onto the scene to address that fragmentation and give advertisers the ability to control over frequency and control who sees your ad when, regardless of the number of placements. And we're seeing that now with TV. And there's a lot of different technological options to address fragmentation. Google owns DV360. That's one of the primary DSPs. Sorry to throw more acronyms out there, but DSP is demand side platform, which is essentially just a tool that allows you to buy digital media programmatically in an automated fashion, right? And that applies to TV screens now as well. Like, DSPs were all designed to address fragmentation on the internet with display and online video ads. But now that the internet is on TV screens, this same technology can be applied to address fragmentation on connected TVs. And, obviously there are more and more platforms coming onto the scene where there are advertising opportunities on TV screens. So fragmentation isn't going away as far as a challenge to advertisers. But I'm confident we'll, from an advertising point of view, the tools are all there in order to help manage that. And we can very easily create a plan that achieves your objectives, whether that be mass reach or performance, what have you.
So you mentioned DV360, which is something that's used in the agency pretty frequently for pretty much all of our clients. Talk to us a little bit about measurement. So when we think back to linear TV, we had things like Nielsen people meters and things like that to be able to measure viewership. Right now, like I'm not sure on YouTube, like is a view considered one person? How are you looking at people watching YouTube on a connected device, like connected TV? Are you able to measure like who's there? Is it a room full of, a family? Like how are you addressing measurement for connected TV, or are you assuming that a view is a person?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. I think if you look back at how TV has been measured, and you talked about Nielsen panels and like people meters, and that was kind of created as a way to address a technical limitation of linear TV, right? There was just sort of the broadcast, and it was impossible to tell whether the TV was on or off and who was watching, et cetera. So they started to obviously give people devices that would sort of record and be able to tell whether the TV was on or off. And then if you look at digital from that same perspective, digital has never had that problem on the internet, right? Because of the technology that's inherent in digital. It's sort of part and parcel with every form of digital media that we can accurately measure when an ad is served, the interactions that happen as a result of that. And it's never had to be panel-based. It's always going to be an accurate measurement of how many impressions occurred. And then beyond that, how many interactions occurred. And that's sort of been just sort of in the DNA of all digital marketing. Now, and the same is true for connected TV. So if the video plays, that's measured, and it's measured accurately. We don't have to rely on a panel to do that. And then the second part of it is the complications around beyond the ad playing or the video playing. How many people were in the room. We know that there's at least one, and we can accurately report on whether or not there was at least one person that saw the video or started the video or interacted with it. But we also know that because of the environment, right? It's the living room, it's the TV screen, it's the sort of the prime real estate in the household as far as media is concerned. And that usually entails somebody else in the room. And we know from our own internal studies that at least 20% of YouTube sessions on TV screens happen with more than one person watching. And so we have a few different methodologies where we can start to measure that. And we've started reporting on that about 1.5 years ago. And so if you were running YouTube campaigns, you could look in your reporting and it'll tell you how many people co-viewed in addition to our standard reporting metrics. So it's based on either surveys or third-party accredited validation, where we can measure in partnership with some third parties exactly how many people were in the room to do that.
And it's really interesting, like knowing now that there's this average 20% co-viewing is something like I wasn't aware was happening. I didn't know that was being measured by Google. So that's great to know.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the newer developments in terms of the technology around connected TV, and it is a important piece that I think the whole industry needs to address as far as accurately reporting on the exposure of an ad. And again, forever, digital has had the ability to accurately measure sort of the binary, did someone see this or not? And that continues to be the case. But with TV, it's not a one-on-one environment. So we need to be able to address what else is happening with respect to any ad impression.
It's interesting that it is the internet on TV, but I imagine I don't know if I'm going to say the average user, but I imagine there's a chunk of users who aren't necessarily thinking about that when they're watching TV, because your experience of watching TV is just watching TV, but it is the internet on TV, which is great in the sense that, like, okay, from an advertiser's perspective, there's data, you can probably be a little more targeted, I imagine. But there's also like the flip side of it. It's like, it's also the internet. There's also cookies. There's also information about you that's being gathered. Like, you know, when you were watching Everybody Loves Raymond, they had an idea of who you are, but it's like, it's the internet. They know who you are. And I just wonder if there's like any like ethical considerations around that. And, you know, with cookies and stuff, like, is this a conversation that's happening in the media world?
I hope it's happening. We're certainly having that conversation. Well, first off, there are no cookies on TV screens, right?
Okay, yeah.
So with connected TV advertising, it's sort of an offshoot of digital in that we don't have the ability to rely on cookies, which are also going away.
That's true.
But for now, in this still cookie world, the TV screen is sort of on the outskirts of that. There are no cookies with TV screens, so we have to rely on different ways to identify audiences. And, you know, forever that's been the bread and butter of digital marketing, is we can identify audience, we can be very precise with how we target our ads. And so there are some challenges with that on the TV screen in the absence of cookies. So on the one hand, for platforms like YouTube, where the majority of people are signed in, which ties you to your YouTube account and your Google account, and so you have a very rich set of signals that allow us to identify your interests and behaviors, et cetera, that gives advertisers the ability to target in a more informed way. But outside of platforms like YouTube that don't have the luxury of such a big signed-in user graph, how do you identify an audience when there are no cookies? And this is where, you know, the DSP question comes into play. Different DSPs rely on different pieces of technology to identify audiences, and most of that, I think, is dictated by privacy concerns. And I can say from experience that Google always errs on the side of caution with respect to privacy. And, you know, sometimes to the frustration of our advertisers who don't have the ability to be as precise as they would like due to privacy constraints. But for example, a lot of other DSPs will use IP address targeting as one example. And so basically what that means is any data that flows through your router at the house is fair game for identifying you. And obviously, there's a few problems with that. Number one, privacy, which goes without saying. Number two would be accuracy, right? So, you know, think of a scenario where you're in a condo building and there's potentially hundreds of different household units sharing the same IP address, which is not an uncommon scenario. That means that your behavior in apartment 1B would be, as far as the DSP is concerned, exactly the same user as somebody on the 17th floor.
Right.
So your accuracy will be minimal. So Google, for one, never uses IP address targeting. And I know also in Europe, that's no longer allowed. So it's probably only a matter of time before that happens here. As we've seen in the past, privacy regulations that start in Europe eventually make their way to North America. Secondly, I know there are changes coming to the way IP addresses are tracked. And IPv4 is transferring over to IPv6. It's going to make it a lot more challenging for anyone who's relying on IP addresses to identify audiences. So the quagmire of privacy with respect to IP addresses is going to make things very challenging. And I think we're going to see more reliance on signed-in user data, which is probably not too surprising, but we'll also probably see a return to more contextual type targeting in the absence of signed-in user data. So long story short, privacy is definitely a concern on CTV, more so than it ever has been, I think, on mobile devices or desktops, et cetera. So definitely is something I'm interested to see where it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely not a solved problem.
Just because you brought up a phrase that I know I use so much and I've used in the past so much and I love, and you said, we will, in some ways, some of our strategies might be going back to contextual advertising.
Yeah.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, just in terms of targeting the content as a proxy for the audience versus targeting the audience itself. And then, digital for a number of years has leaned very heavily on audience targeting, and it works. We all know that it's great. But in environments like the living room, privacy is an issue, which means we can't rely as heavily on audience targeting. And I think that means, and also because of the premium environment, like it's the living room, there are multiple people there in the household, the exposure is greater. The effect is more pronounced. We've seen lots of studies that show ad recall and brand awareness. All those are lifted in a greater way in the living room. So we know that it works really well because of that environment. But that also means we have to respect privacy more, and we have to, I think, lean more on the type of content that we're targeting. And so I think as a marketer, because of that, all those considerations, you're not going to be able to be as precise as you're probably used to with digital marketing in the living room. And so a modicum of contextual targeting or content targeting is probably going to be required, right? Like let's go back to the window example. If you're a marketer of windows, what does your target audience watch on TV? And think about it from that lens versus who was on my website that I can inundate with ads and show those ads on connected TVs. So, you would look at types of content that is relevant to that audience, right? Like home decor, renovation, but not solely. I think you can't 100% rely on contextual targeting. There's still going to be a little bit of both. But I think we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on.
Yeah, I love hearing that because I feel like a long time ago with just linear TV, before digital, a lot of what we did was contextual buying and contextual environments and making sure that the messages we were putting out there were in that kind of relevant space where it felt like it was the right audience. And it feels like there was such a shift when programmatic came in. It's like, it doesn't necessarily matter the environment. We got to get the right audience. And obviously the benefits to that from an efficiency and effectiveness perspective are great. But hearing again, people starting to come back to having some contextual relevancy, especially for some of our clients that are very niche, some specific B2B ones, having a layer in your strategy that is that kind of contextually relevant space. I know I love having that in some of our strategies. So anytime someone mentions that phrase, I just kind of jump on it because I'm like, yes, I love hearing that because it's just kind of like the right audience, right space, the right environment. So
I think it opens, from a creative perspective at least, it opens doors for like tone and being like, hey, your audience really likes mystery, or your audience really likes comedy or whatever. It's like you can actually bring a little bit of that if you're otherwise sort of speaking at this level. It's like, hey, you can experiment with speaking at maybe a different register. And I think that's interesting to me only. Anyway.
And it's more important in the connected TV context because of the living room, right? I think the context is going to be all that more important because it's not a one-to-one environment. The images are bigger, they're more prominent, the sound is louder. People probably have like high quality speakers that it's going through. So the impact of that is greater, and therefore the context of the ad is all that much more important.
So we talked a little bit about some of Jen Kelley's clients and some niche audiences. We do some really great B2B work here at the agency. I myself love doing B2B work specifically. And in the far past, some of those B2B marketers were kind of shut out of the linear TV experience, I think, because they didn't have that ability to target the audience or get that contextual relevancy that we just talked about.
Or the mass appeal just was not there.
Yeah. So now we have the layer of data and targeting and stuff in connected TV. So what would you say to a B2B advertiser that has always kind of wanted that big screen kind of environment and experience? Is connected TV maybe an option for them, even though their audiences are super niche?
I mean, I would say dive in. I can understand the hesitance with linear because of the limitations around targeting and the cost concerns around that. So what digital brings to the table is, more precise targeting. And as we talked about, it's not going to be 100% precise, but it's going to be a lot more precise than the targeting that was available for linear. And on top of that, it's the flexibility and the control with buying connected TV or buying digital media versus buying broadcast media. So the flexibility to adjust on the fly, to optimize mid-campaign, or to pause if something unforeseen happens. So that flexibility, again, that's inherent. That's always been the case with digital media. You have the ability to optimize and change things on the fly. And so your risk is that much lower. And I think those two things combined, the flexibility and the audience targeting, contextual targeting, make the TV screen accessible to advertisers that probably wouldn't even have considered it before. So again, it's the internet is the great, democratizer, equalizer, and it enables anyone to sort of place ads in the living room. So that would include B2B advertisers as well.
So would your advice be just, do some exploration, do some digging, see what's available from a targeting perspective, obviously, depending on who you're looking to go after, but just to dive in, see what's there and give it a try.
For sure, yeah. And you can start out small. You can, again, part of the whole flexibility theme is you don't have to target the whole country. You don't have to target a whole province. You can target just one area. Again, these are all capabilities that have always existed for digital marketing, and they now exist on the TV screen. So you can launch a campaign that targets Burlington on the TV screen and test it out for a couple of weeks, and you can adapt. You can look at the reporting, figure out how it performed, and use that to inform your next buy. And I feel like that's probably a lot more difficult to do on linear. And therefore, any B2B advertiser that was hesitant in the past to run on the TV screen, I would say now's the time to start testing it out.
With regards to linear TV, are you thinking of particular audiences, particular categories? If you had to say right now, who is linear TV still making sense for?
You're leading the witness a little bit, but I'll play along because I do happen to agree. Obviously, linear demographically skews more towards older demographics. And that will probably remain the case for a little while, but even that is changing, and we're seeing 54 plus demos starting to become more and more entrenched in streaming behavior. I could throw a bunch of stats out to support that, but I think we all can recognize just from our own friends and family that people are increasingly cutting the cable, cutting the cord, starting to get used to things like Netflix and Disney Plus and Prime Video and YouTube and everything else, and this is just becoming the norm, and it's just sort of making its way through the different demographic groups. And if you look at the other end of the spectrum, like the younger audiences, and I think about my kids, they have no idea what linear even is. We do have linear at my house, but my kids don't even know how to get to it and turn it on. You have to sort of change the inputs on the TV, et cetera. And I always tell a story about, telling my kids to turn on the TV while they're watching Netflix because I want to watch CP24 or something. And them looking at me blankly like, what do you mean, Dad? The TV's already on. Why are you saying turn on the TV? And I have to explain, no, I mean flip the inputs, put it on cable. Yeah. What's cable? They don't know what any of this means. They just know the TV screen is on, they're watching TV. And whether that's YouTube or Disney Plus or anything, to them, that's TV. And that, I think we're going to see that make its way through all the different segments of the population.
Yeah, my kids have very limited exposure to linear, and they actually just get annoyed. They're like, oh, another ad, come on. I was just watching, it's like, no, you're only in this stage now where you can watch things without being interrupted. It's like, no, interruption is built into how things are filmed. Don't you get it? There are 3 acts for a reason. It works narratively speaking, but actually you need time for commercials. And
yeah. And whenever we do find ourselves watching something on linear TV, and the kids ask me to pause it, and me having to explain that you can't, this is happening, and then we cannot control the time, and to them that's absurd.
Yeah.
What do you mean we can't pause this and watch it later? So like the idea of like watching live events is foreign to them. And so, I just look at it as the behavior on the TV screen is changing. We sort of the technological limitations of linear created a certain behavior, appointment viewing, etc. And now that's kind of changing into streaming, and what streaming technology, what are the implications of that for behavior? And now that everyone is used to being able to control what they want to watch, when they want to watch it, exactly what they want to watch, that is changing the whole way people interact with the TV screen. And so I always like to talk about it in the context of this behavior. We can call the behavior streaming or what have you, but it's been enabled by the technology, right? The internet. And so what we're seeing is a massive change in advertising as a result of that. And this is kind of a transition period between linear into connected TV or streaming or whatever you want to call it. I don't think we're quite finalized in terms of what the terminology is going to be. Mm-hmm. My personal prediction is that the whole connected part of connected TV will become redundant, and we'll just talk about it in the terms of TV, right? Just like we did with mobile phones. Nobody says mobile phone anymore. It's just a phone. And I think probably eventually we'll get there with TV. But for now, let's stick with connected TV.
I love what you said about changing behavior. And I think the reason that behavior around connected TV is changing so quickly is that it's not just kind of like younger generations adopting it, and then those, we're waiting for those young people to grow and evolve, and that changes the behavior of everybody. The behavior is being changed across all age groups.
The experience is so good that it's not like we're just waiting on people to get it. It's like, no, you experience that once and you're like, oh, this is so much better. Pausing and watching something when I want to. That is enough for me to be like, yeah, why? like waiting for people to adopt is like, no, it's good. And people are like, no, I will subscribe to that. Like that is,
Yeah, and then there's the whole question of content. And if you look at, it used to be, right, all the best content was on TV, and the major HBO broadcasters owned that content. And if you wanted to watch it, you had to tune in. By tune in, I mean like turn on your linear TV subscription and watch the content
at
there.
7:00 on Thursday.
Exactly, yeah. And then that started to change with PVR, et cetera, and you could watch it later on. That was one development. But now, if you look at who's making the best, and I use air quotes because that's subjective, but let's use award-winning as a proxy. Which type of content is winning Emmys, et cetera? And it's not the traditional broadcasters anymore. It's Netflix, it's Hulu, it's Disney Plus, it's HBO, and others. And so if you're using award-winning as a proxy for the best content, again, if you're reliant on linear for all of your video consumption, you're missing out on at least what the industry considers to be the best content. And so, and I saw that, anecdotally with like my mom, for example, who still uses linear for the most part, and everybody would be talking about a certain show and she had never heard of it, right? Because it's not on her traditional view of TV. So I had to set her up with like Disney Plus, et cetera, and HBO so she could watch Game of Thrones. And then she started to realize that this is where all the best new content was, and she would get used to that streaming behavior. And my kids have even got her subscribed to a few YouTube channels now, and she's using linear less and less. And so, she's in her 70s. So that's just one, obviously a survey of one, but to your point, I think that's what we're starting to see is because of the impact that technology has had on behavior that is making its way into the content. And that I think is the ultimate driver of what people choose to watch and when.
I like that you said that because, and it's even interesting when Paul and I were talking before the interview, and you had mentioned sort of content or quality, and even when you're like, award-winning Netflix and HBO and Prime and pick a thing. I wouldn't necessarily consider YouTube in this category, but you were saying a couple things. One, you had talked about like the creator economy, and you're like, no, people, like it's their whole job actually to create content for YouTube. That's very good. So there is like, that's already one thing to consider. But something else that you had mentioned when you're like, this idea of legitimate content is actually like there's just the wrong way to look at it from an advertiser's perspective, because whether content is like well produced or not is irrelevant if people are watching it. And I was like, that is a very good point. Like, yeah, my kid's daughter is not watching, like she's watching families go on vacation, just the worst crap. It's the worst. But she watches it constantly, all the time. She knows who these people are. She doesn't care that it was filmed on a phone. Yeah. She doesn't care that the audio is garbage and it's just bleh. It doesn't matter. Like, she's watching it and she is not alone. Like, millions of kids are watching these things. And I just thought, like, oh, what a great perspective on this idea of like being an advertiser and sort of being like, well, we want to go where the legitimate good content is. And you were kind of like, that doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, exactly. Who gets to decide what legitimate content is? Ultimately, I think viewers will decide what's legitimate to them. And again, it's a change in technology that's driving that. And I think before the internet, the idea of legitimate content was decided because of technological limitations, right? There was only so much inventory, so much airtime, and so many TV shows that, it had to be a certain type of content that made its way onto the TV screen.
Right.
And it was sort of like a consensus, right? So it was never going to be exactly what everybody liked the best, but it was sort of average enough that everybody in North America would tune into this show.
Right.
Because that's all there was.
Yeah.
But now, because of technology, anybody with a phone can produce content and put it on the internet, and anybody can watch that content, right? And that content can vary from me filming my morning coffee, something as asinine as that, to a very highly produced, high quality, scripted content. Yeah. Mr. Beast is a great example, literally. Right? And so who are we to say which is legit?
Right.
And if millions of people decide to watch it, then maybe that's legit, Yeah. And so it's changing. So because of the internet, everybody has the ability to watch whatever they want, whenever they want. And I don't think we've fully realized the implications of that, which is massive. And the changes are finally happening on the TV screen. And we've seen them happen on mobile and desktop devices. And the TV screen is sort of the last frontier of the internet. Mm-hmm. And again, we're still in that transition phase where advertisers aren't 100% sure what to do with all this. The media platforms aren't 100% sure what to do with all this. And we're all kind of learning as this sea change of behavior is happening. It's super interesting to watch in real time.
Much earlier in this conversation, remember when you were talking about you would get reports and it would show here is viewership, whatever, across mobile, tablet, desktop. And then you're like, oh, and we're starting to see a connected TV kind of creeping as a short line, and now it's grown. So my question is about cross-device targeting. So, because one of the amazing things that we can do through digital, and especially through Google, is target people in different ways on their devices and have strategies where they see, we communicate a message on one device and then reach them in a different device in a different way. Have you seen any specific strategies or results or campaigns or anything that kind of harnessed the power of cross-device targeting in a really creative way or a really effective way?
There's probably some small examples here and there, and I think advertisers are just starting to test out that technology. So technically, you can do that, right? And you can sequence an ad where the introduction could appear on the TV screen, and then the next ad that the user sees will be on their mobile device, and you can have a different version, or you can orchestrate that across display and video, etc., so that there's a story being told in sequence. So yes, the technology exists to do that. I haven't seen any advertisers do that at any scale. In my opinion, I think that's being a little too cute right now. And by that, I mean you're ignoring sort of the primary function of each individual device when you're trying to do something like that. And that's not to say that it's impossible and that you shouldn't do it. I just think from my perspective, take a step back and think about what you're actually trying to achieve with whatever campaign you're running, and then choose the device or the environment accordingly. And if you're looking for efficient reach, there's a way to do that, and there's an appropriate mix across TV screens and mobile devices, et cetera. And that would apply to anything, really. So kind of, I guess, a convoluted way to answer your question is technically, yes, you can do that, but it's very complicated to orchestrate. And I think it's missing the opportunity to have greater impact. Okay. But I mean, again, it's not something that I would actively discourage per se. Like if you really want to do something cool, and you're more creative than I am, the technology exists to enable that. So why not test it out?
So let's have a quick chat about AI, because we cannot have a conversation without asking about AI.
We will be fired.
It must happen. AI must be involved. So there are some very obvious applications for AI when it comes to connected TV, assuming we'll be able to flush out a plethora of ad creative and variations for testing and things of that nature. So it'll be super helpful from a content creative, whatever perspective. Are there any other applications for AI when it comes to buying, strategy, any other things that we don't see yet?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We obviously hear a lot about AI. We talk about it, several dozen times per day at my office. But, obviously AI is a huge part of what we do. The thing is, it's never not been a huge part of what we do. And I've been working at Google for 17 years, and AI has always been a core part of our advertising solutions. We just didn't call it AI, right? We would call it auto optimization, or more recently machine learning, but just different flavors of automation. And I think that's the AI is just sort of the next phase of that. It basically just means that our automation of advertising is getting better. So what are the implications of that for connected TV? Hard to say. You've outlined a lot of them already, right? So creative testing, A/B, that's already been part of our video solutions forever, continues to be part of our solutions on the TV screen. Targeting is also going to be part of that. But I think the main promise of AI for all advertising is sort of taking a lot of the guesswork out of advertising and focusing in on results. So AI has always done a great job of focusing advertising in on performance. And if you need to achieve a certain sales target or any lower funnel type advertising, automation or machine learning or AI has always done a great job, and Google's always excelled at that. What's new is AI, or whatever you want to call it, is making its way further up the funnel. And it can now be applied to consideration campaigns and awareness campaigns. And we're seeing more and more ad products centered around those things. And I think what you'll see this year is a lot of AI type mixes of campaigns that are designed to achieve brand objectives, whether that's awareness or reach or consideration. There are going to be a lot of developments around creating campaigns or making it easy for advertisers to execute against a specific goal. So if your goal is, I need to reach 5 million Canadians in the next month, you can input that into the system, and it'll spit out the best mix for you. So how that pertains to connected TV is the same as it would apply to any other device, really. So the way I look at it is AI is nothing too revolutionary in any kind of advertising, or digital advertising, I should say. What's new is that the TV screen is becoming increasingly digital, which means we have more and more access to AI type tools. So it's not going to be, overnight. It's going to be as effective as AI in terms of running lower funnel campaigns, but we're going to start to see more and more AI technology make its way into upper funnel campaigns, which obviously has a massive overlap with connected TV.
That's really interesting. And it's interesting that you say that AI has always existed, because now when you're talking about, it used to be called machine learning, it used to be called auto optimization. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's always kind of been there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just becoming more and more effective. Like all the tools and automation. Like my first job at Google was literally writing lists of keywords for advertisers so that they can target their search campaigns. So obviously that job doesn't exist anymore, right? Like we have systems.
No, that poor person. They're not writing keywords.
This is me. So all of us that had that job are now doing other things.
Thank God.
Thank God. But yeah, I mean, we've just seen more and more development as far as technology to automate a lot of the tedious things that we have to do as marketers and advertisers. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out for the TV screen. And we've seen, pieces of that happen already with, automated mix plans come out of our tools, auto creative testing, A and B, et cetera. And so we'll see what the future holds for AI in terms of CTV, but I'm excited about it.
Okay, so final question. I think it's not a terrible idea to talk about how to actually go about doing this. So some of our audience members, you're in digital marketing, you're buying some stuff, I get it. But if you haven't bought connected TV yet, what's that process like for someone who's new? How do they get started?
For sure. I think it depends on what type of advertiser you are, right? If you are a large advertiser, you're probably already buying a large amount of media, and therefore you're probably using some sort of enterprise tool like DV360, in which case you're already halfway there, right? So you can use DV360 to execute a connected TV campaign across YouTube, across all other forms of media. It is probably the most effective tool in your kit as far as how to buy connected TV. And so therefore I would recommend using it, obviously. But if you're not a large advertiser, and you're probably not using a tool like DV360, question is, how do you even get started? Maybe you haven't ever bought linear TV and you're interested in, now that the technology enables it, how do you get your ad on a TV screen? Mm-hmm. And I think YouTube is probably the best entry point into that. There's going to be other platforms as well, but YouTube, thanks to the reach and just the ease of use, anybody can sign up for a Google Ads account, upload a video ad, and target TV screens on YouTube, and you're live, right? Like you have a campaign running. So I think that's probably the easiest way. And again, this is the great equalizer, the internet. Google has always been front and center in that regard. And any advertiser now has the ability to run TV campaigns, basically.
So what is it, like youtube.com/advertise? I'm joking. I'm sure they can figure it out.
Just Google it.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thank you so much. You might not totally realize this, but it's very snowy outside right now. And our guest braved their way in. So I really appreciate that you guys made the time. And thank you. And thank you for watching. We will see you again next month.